Sorry.
Rich Lenkov is here. Obviously, one of the major stories is what happened in Michigan yesterday. But let me first say to Rich, congratulations on your stand-up debut with our friend John DeCoste. Zanies does this thing where they do what amounts to a comedy camp, and DeCoste worked with Rich, and he had a big smash set.
Not sure about that part, but I will accept the congratulations for getting it up there and knocking it off my list.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, what's next on your bucket list?
Well, me and DeCoste are playing Vegas this weekend. We're opening the
you are? Oh, okay. Well, congratulations.
Yeah. We're going from Zanies right to the big room at Caesars.
A lot of people have said you're kind of usher in the courtroom. So, it's not like that. All right, Rich, this precedent-setting case yesterday where the mother of this 15-year-old gunman that killed 5 in Michigan is going to go to jail herself with the father's trial yet to come. How big a deal is this?
Well, it's unprecedented, as you mentioned, and it's really a big deal, especially when you consider the reaction from the families of the 4 victims, right? They were all quoted as being very relieved and satisfied with the verdict, thereby, I think, encouraging prosecutors in the future to go after parents in the same way. So I think that makes it a really big deal. And the important part, as we heard in your news break earlier, I think, was the fact that she was held accountable because she was really the last adult to handle the gun before the shooter took over. And, as we just heard in the quote, it would have been presumably easy for her to just supervise his handling of the gun and be more apparent, as we just heard from one of the victims' families. So I think it's a really significant decision.
Rich, now her husband's going to go on trial for facing similar charges. Will that jury be allowed to know what happened in his wife's trial and Jennifer Crumley's trial, or is that just completely separate and the jury isn't going to be allowed to? Well, I mean, they're going to try and isolate them as much as they can, I'm sure. But the one is not going to have any effect on the other,
I think it's a fair question. Access to evidence and all that, any crossover?
Yeah, well, first of all, they'll be aware, just like any member of the public is aware of the verdict, right? I mean, their instructions will be to try to base the evidence base their decision simply on the evidence in the present case. But there'll definitely be crossover evidence. I mean, much of the same evidence that led to the conviction of the mother will also be used against the father. For example, the drawings and the renderings in his room and the various warnings that they had. So that'll all be, that could all be used in the second trial. There's no, prohibition against using evidence against a different defendant. Of course, you can't retry the same person, but you could try another person for a similar crime.
Unprecedented probably means we don't know how long a sentence she's going to get, right?
Up to 60 years. I mean, she was convicted on all 4 counts for each of the victims. So we don't know yet what the sentence will be. But again, if the goal is to send a message, I would presume that the judge will impose a fairly stiff sentence.
Federal charges, or are they local charges? Point being, federal charges, she'd have to do at least 80% of the sentence, right?
Correct. Yeah, these are state charges.
Okay.
But still, again, I think we'll see a significant amount of time.
Nick, you were talking earlier about maybe the father has a window where he gets less because she was the last person in. Do you want to expand on that question?
Yeah, I mean, so because she was the one that was last in possession of that firearm before the son took it, even though her defense was, well, it was my husband's responsibility to lock up the gun. Do you think he would not have such a harsh, well, not harsh, but how culpable is he in this?
Listen, I think there's plenty of blame to go around. I mean, the standard for involuntary manslaughter is whether a reasonable person would have been aware of the warning signs and, negligently failed to act to avoid them. I think even though that he wasn't the final possessor of the gun, there's lots of other evidence that he was, negligent, so to speak, in failing to observe what was readily obvious and take actions to prevent the shooting. So I think there's enough evidence, even despite the fact that he wasn't the last person with the gun.
The Trump effort to get presidential immunity in regards to charges of inciting a riot on January 6th. Appeals court throws it out. Now he's going to try to push it to the Supreme Court. At least we assume that's the case. Will the Supreme Court hear it?
I think they'll hear it, because that's what the Supreme Court is there for, to take up cases that are rather unprecedented, which this case is. There's only been one other time in presidential history where, with Nixon, where this has been a claim. So I think for sure they'll take it up. They'll take it up quickly. I don't think that Trump will win that argument at the Supreme Court. I think he stands a greater chance, for example, with the 14th Amendment case that's being argued tomorrow. But in terms of this, I think it's fairly a clear-cut case that he's not immune from criminal prosecution. So I think it will go up. It will go fairly quickly, but I think Trump will lose.
The immunity thing was so broad that there was no way that the appeals court could say he's right about this. Is that too simple a reading?
I think that's correct. I think Trump made the mistake of trying to basically say, as he's saying today, he's literally tweeting today that we should save presidential immunity by electing him to office. It's a nutty theory, in my opinion, constitutionally. But yeah, I think you're right. I think he made it very easy for them to reject that very broad argument rather than, perhaps pursuing a much more narrow, legally based argument. But that's not what Trump does.
Wouldn't that have to be a constitutional amendment, though, if you're going to say, the president has absolute power?
Yes. I think that would be the only means by which that you could argue that, but there's no way that's happening, obviously. But I think you're right, Andre. I think that's correct.
That's crazy.
The sentencing coming up right around the time that the father goes to trial. The kid didn't testify in this. The kid's obviously very, very mentally ill and grew up in a very damaging situation. But the story is far from over. The Trump story obviously will go on, and we'll find out when the Supreme Court will answer to this. He may have, in a weird backwards way, won to some extent, just in regards to delay of getting the actual insurrection case to court. The idea being, could this get put off beyond the election? They're not talking about that kind of a delay, but this delay created by this case and an appeal to the Supreme Court could extend it. No idea how long, though, right, Rich?
No, I think they'll take up the case fairly quickly because of the import. But, of course, Trump, like you said, is trying to push it off until after the election when he will just disband all of these cases and disband all the investigations altogether.
But pardoning, that's the other thing, too. Okay, if you want to go all the way down the road, right? If he were to win the election, pardon himself, there'd be a massive outcry and a court challenge of another sort and an attempt to reverse that through constitutional amendment and all these unprecedented things. Listen, that's what you're signing up for if you continue to support Orange Julius. All right. Thank you, Rich. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Good to talk to you.
Thanks, Rich.
Rich Lenkov, interrupting his morning basketball. Usually plays hoops in the morning.